All right.
Now you can sing.
I'm not even going to sing. Now I
No!
don't
Oh,
even
this thing.
Minisode. It's a Minisode from Minnesota.
Ah!
It's Chris and Marie, and we're not talking science now.
No, we'll talk
Yet.
about our favorite movies, and we'll talk about science at the end. Marie, I'm excited. So, listeners, the Alien Odyssey Part 3 episode, there's so much to this story that we're kind of reformatting a little bit the ending here, because there's a big section where they get interviewed by the FBI, and there's some stuff about a nuclear power plant explosion potentially. It's all kinds of crazy stuff. So we're working through that, but to give you guys something to chew on in the meantime.
It's an odyssey.
It is an odyssey.
You don't rush an odyssey.
What is
homeboy?
No, you don't. So
it's an odyssey.
In the meantime, we're going to give you guys this mini episode to try to tide you over. So first part of the episode is a great idea from Marie, which is our top 3 favorite horror movies.
Oh, yes.
We're going to talk about that. And then the second part is an idea from Chris, which is what is the Reynolds number, and the idea of dimensionless numbers and similarity in engineering analysis.
Which
I think those topics say a lot about our personalities, Marie.
So good. So good.
It's the yin and yang of this podcast.
Oh my God.
Oh goodness. Oh goodness me. Okay. So horror movies.
Horror movies.
You know, we were talking about this a little bit at the beginning of our call, and now the beginning of the episode, where I am already like knee deep in a Halloween season mode. Like if you look at my Spotify playlist, it's like horror movie themes and classical horror and the Rocky Horror Picture Show soundtrack and like stuff like that, whatever. And then my house is always pretty much my house is always like halfway decorated for Halloween, because we have a lot of weird antiques and like creepy paintings and stuff. But it's not until Halloween that we take out the actual like pumpkins and things. But it's pretty much always right at that level.
Really put in you go that extra mile.
Oh my God.
That 3 months.
If I had
up to it.
If I had my way, we would live in a haunted castle all the time.
Oh my God.
Pretty much.
I think Katie's probably like, yeah, I'm
No.
sure we would.
Yeah,
I'm sure we would, buddy. I know you would.
Right.
Me and my lawyer, we wouldn't be, but that's cool. No, I'm just...
Listen, I got to the point where she has to hire a lawyer. It's going great. Going well.
You and the haunted, you could come up with some ghoul for your power of attorney.
Oh my goodness.
So I thought, of course, and we both saw a really excellent horror movie, not together, but separately. And we've talked about it a little bit, and we'll try not to spoil it here, but that's like in my top 10. So I was like, of course, we're going to have to talk. I was like, let's talk about something fun. Let's talk about horror movies. Yay. And then you're like, science stuff. And I'm like, okay.
I'm so sorry, Marie.
No, dude, it's all cool. It's all good.
Hereditary it's in my top 10 too, actually.
Yeah.
It's so good. It was So we probably will spoil a little of the movie, or hopefully not a lot of the movie, but if you haven't seen it yet, you may want to skip ahead a little bit just to be safe. But I would say, because it's hard to talk about without spoiling. Yeah, it's pretty much impossible, I would say.
Yeah.
So for me, the reason I liked the movie so much was because it wasn't overtly, like, there wasn't like a monster that pops out, right? Which is a big, awesome, I like monster movies, I guess, but it is always so disappointing when a monster, like when Mama was really good until the end when, whatever,
Woo.
right? The thing. Anyways, but Hereditary,
Jump scare.
the only
Jump
thing,
scares are kind of half-baked,
the only thing with Hereditary that was kind of not disappointing at all, but I kind of guessed the way it was going to end like 25 minutes in.
Really?
Yeah. like I whispered to Katie, I was like, I bet this is gonna happen.
Really interesting.
And then it happened. And I kind of have a bad, see, I think it's this confirmation bias because I feel like I do that with movies a lot, but it's only the times that I'm right that really stick with me. Like I remember for some god awful reason, my friends and I went to go see the second G.I. Joe movie together in theaters. And we were just tearing into it the whole time. And there was a part where like one of these musclehead dudes is like in the water scuba diving or something. And a jellyfish passed by. And I jokingly whispered to one of my friends, that's not a real jellyfish. It's a robot jellyfish. And then it was a robot jellyfish. And it was really stupid, but funny. But so with this one, though, the cool thing with Hereditary was the trailers didn't spoil it at all.
No.
From the trailers, you thought that
totally different movie.
You thought it would be a totally different movie. So I thought it was really great. Anyways,
those MNFers.
I know.
No,
yeah. Oh, so good.
I think so. The thing I like about it is, again, it's more of a psychological horror movie in that it's talking about families and family problems, really. I mean, if it didn't have like any sort of horror to it and it was just sort of this family drama, you would still like have all these knots in your stomach about sort of what's going on with this family. So basically the premise is it's a small family, a mom, a dad, they've got a 16-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. And the grandmother or the mom's mom passes away. And it's sort of the contentious relationship that she had with her daughter and what happens after her death. That is the sort of the baseline of the story and is really sort of the root of all of the horror and all of the action of the story. And it makes you, what it kind of makes you really uncomfortable about, and what works really well for horror is it's like, it plays off of the idea that the problems that you have within you or within your family, you'll never be able to outrun or you'll never be able to change. There's no such thing as free will, and that eventually the evil will be passed on or will affect you. And this is just, the timing and the performances and everything were just like, you go the first, like, I want to say the first part of the movie the whole movie's about mourning loss, really acutely mourning loss. And then the last 5 minutes, it goes off the rails and stuff just goes full on horror. Like if you were nuts. If you're watching this and you're like, man, this isn't scary. I'm not getting any, what? And then like, holy smokes. The one scene where he wakes up out of bed and you don't really see what's going on behind him.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, you know what? Come on, people.
Well, the thing that's nuts about that last scene though is, and this is
like 5 minutes and you're like,
yeah. This is heavy spoiler territory here. So yes. If you stayed with us this long, jump out now if you haven't seen the movie. In the last minute where he's just standing there and it's just his face looking at you, I thought that was really great because it doesn't really hit you until that point. Like leaving the theater and thinking about then what that ending meant for all of the other parts of the movie.
Yes.
And then all the other pieces that come in, like that means that the grandmother, this is what I think that ending points to. The grandmother had the daughter as a mistake because she was trying to create a son specifically using this magic ritual to be the embodiment of Paimon. Right? And so then when the son says to her that he is, or she mentions that her brother killed himself because he thought the mother was trying to put voices in his head. That was actually
people inside him.
That was actually happening.
That was actually real.
That was real. So Then it talks about how she never really paid any attention to the daughter or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then she has the kid, the son, doesn't really pay attention, has the little girl who is the embodiment of Paimon, and just smothers it with love. And then like the evilness of the grandmother that she she specifically created these people. She had the daughter not out of love, but out of desire, greed, lust for money, or lust for riches, lust for power that this thing could bring her. That doesn't hit you until the end of the movie, where because the whole time you're watching it, you're like, oh, it's a ghost, it's a horror, whatever, it's just normal stuff. And then it gets to the end and it's like, holy shit, you know, this is like the grandma is depraved in her evilness, I guess.
Yes, that she had been planning this.
Right, and that level of depravity, that level of disdain for human life, it is a huge part of the witchcraft story. And not like Wiccan, not like whatever. It's a huge part of the demonology story. And it really, seeing that movie is what made me think we should do an episode on that for Halloween.
Oh yeah.
And it's why I'm up to my neck in grimoires at the moment. But,
oh my God.
And that was the other thing that was really cool too, was all the symbology and stuff that they used is from real demonological sources. Like that symbol for Paimon is his sigil. The necklace that they all wear is the sigil for Paimon. So for listeners that don't know, and we're going to talk about this more when we get into the episode, Paimon is one of like the
king of hell.
Not really
he's a king of hell.
He's a king of hell. He's a king of hell, but like the title of king though is kind of a
he's a court. He's one of the members of the court.
Exactly. It's like being an archangel in some ways. So it's like the opposite of the archangels. And so he is the king that's representative of the west part of the compass, and is it's so there's all of this lore around this figure that does exist in these books and things, and it's super interesting. It's fascinating. So yeah, Hereditary. Oh, goddamn, Hereditary was so good.
It was like halfway through it, man, or like right after the one scene with the telephone pole. Did you see the sigil on the telephone pole?
Oh my God, I missed the sigil on the telephone pole.
Yeah.
As soon as the little girl chopped off the head of the pigeon, I was like, someone's gonna lose a head.
What's up with that?
Someone's gonna lose a head, and it's gonna be something like that. But
the boy too. So I was reading this article about it because, of course, after I saw it, I was like, I have to read everything I can find about this movie because it was that's like the guy that was the director's first thing that he's done, which is amazing. And they were talking about how Steven Spielberg would focus on people's faces for a very long time to show wonder. So instead of showing the thing that is so miraculous and so incredible, they show people's reaction to it.
Okay.
Which is, you can kind of see in like E.T., you can see it in some of...
I'm thinking of the scene in Jurassic Park where he first sees the dinosaurs.
Where he looks up and you're seeing
with his hat,
reaction.
Yeah.
His reaction to stuff. And it's classic Spielberg type of... He was one of the first directors that kind of introduced that... I don't want to say now it's probably more of a trope, but introduce that to filmmaking. Here, it's like it's flipped on its axis, right?
Yeah.
It is the other side of the coin. You are seeing the person's face, as pure horror unfolds, and like almost they are mentally becoming undone, and you're watching it.
Yeah,
and that to me is like him sitting, and his eyes, like he's still driving. And his eyes start to go up to the rear view mirror and stop. And then he's just like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And you just are watching his face like, that kid, that's a great actor. And that was just like, that's when Paul was like, I would like to go home now. I don't want to see the rest of this movie. And I'm like, what? No, but come on, babe. And he's like, I am liking to go home. This is not what I wanted to see. I'm like, and then the rest of it, he's just like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me?"
It's funny. It's funny to me how I wish there had been more to the girl.
Oh, really? See, I was like, nope. Took care of that right off the bat.
I thought
any kind of preconceived notion you had that this is how this movie was going to play out. And it's just like, if you have any kind of contentious relationship with family at any time, which I am sure 100% of our audience has, you'll see this movie and you're just like, oh, like to you're saying, it's like this grandmother, this matriarch planned all of this.
Well, you know what? It also,
I mean, evil, but it's like, that's family, right? That's like family writ large.
Well, it also, so for me at least, it kind of tugged at the old heartstrings, I guess, because it makes you feel like when a loved one passes that you had a complicated relationship with, or even just after kind of, let's say you separate from someone or whatever, you always go back and you second guess and you wonder, time kind of, they say time heals all wounds, right? And it also blurs and kind of, those black and whites that were so clear in your mind previously where I was right and they were wrong or whatever, they start to gray over time. And the edges of right and wrong kind of start to blur. That's why people can forgive someone after such a long period of time, right?
Unless they're a demonologist grandmother.
Well, it kind of perfectly shows this the main character, the wife, and the mother of the kids, and the I can't remember her name either. But
damn, she nailed that.
She was great. But the main character,
that was so good.
The main character is dealing with the death of her mother, who she had a bad relationship with. And you can guess, and at least I was feeling that she must be second guessing herself. Why was this relationship so bad? Should I have forgiven her? Should I have brought her in sooner? Should I have tried to get to know her in the time that she was alive, etc., yada, yada, whatever. And that's why she's feeling such grief, I think, in many ways. And then it ends and you're like, it was that lady was so much worse than you thought. You thought she was at a 7. She's at like a 50, on a 1 to 10 scale. It's just ridiculous. It jumps off so hard. And oh my goodness. I mean, and the thing, oh goodness, we can talk about.
And Toni Collette too. I will say she is the standout role in this, and just her interaction about grief and her scene, especially, there's a few, but with her son at the very end, like when she says that one line and then she clamps her hand back over her mouth, it's just like, oh my, like that is when collectively everyone in the audience, like, that was the biggest reaction.
Right. Almost. I can't imagine.
Everyone gasped.
I can't imagine seeing that movie with like your mother. You know what I mean? Because like everyone, no matter how, and I have a great relationship with my mom, but like we've had fights, everyone has fights with their parents, like whatever. Right. And there are family members. Exactly. Yes. And so it's, there are definitely things that I'm sure I've said to my mom that I shouldn't have said. I know there are. And I'm sure there are things that she wishes she hadn't said at some point, whatever. And so when that scene comes on, it's kind of like, you sit there and you cringe. And if you're next to your mom, it's even worse. Oh goodness.
It is by far, I think, one of my favorite horror movies. I think it's returning to something that is so true, that to me is so more truly frightening than torture porn, and sort of where kind of classic genre horror movies are going now. I feel like this is so much more like I thought about that movie for days afterwards. Okay.
Super good.
So I'm going to say that is definitely one of my top picks. How about for you? What's your second one?
So I would say Hereditary definitely on the top list of my. I would even maybe put it top 5 horror movies of all time.
Oh, yeah.
But for sure, so my favorite horror movie of all time, my favorite horror movies are not good movies. They're terrible. Like, I have a thing.
Sharknado?
Yeah, no, I really love movies like that, when I was in high school and then through college too, I used to do these like terrible movie nights with my friends. And we would watch these horrendous horror movies from like the 60s, late 50s, 60s to 70s to maybe early 80s. But once the 80s hit, it kind of stopped. Everything's trying to be really earnest and they didn't know what was going to be silly looking. And so I watched a lot of kind of grindhouse horror and then also sort of like late 60s, early 70s horror, which was almost always like edging towards pornography in some ways. Like it's really weird and gross in some.
Yeah.
Some
like
of them
the Hammer films.
Yeah. Like some of them are weird and gross. But so my favorite horror movie of all time is probably my favorite one. My actual favorite horror movie is Silence of the Lambs or Red Dragon.
Oh.
I love those books. Like I've read those books probably 50 times each, all three of them. I've even read Hannibal Rising, which was an unfortunate foray into Hannibal's younger years. It was better than the movie was, but it wasn't great. And I just love like the Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal trilogy of books is so tight and good. And it's just they're so good. They're so compelling reads. I love them. So Silence of the Lambs, probably my number one favorite horror movie. My number two favorite horror movie is, I don't even know if it's really considered a horror movie. It's called Freaks. Have you ever seen Freaks?
One of us.
That movie scared the crap out of me as a kid. That movie scared me so bad. And really? So for those that don't know, Freaks is a movie from 1932. Yeah. It is a pre-code horror film. And so pre-code means it's before there was a motion picture production code for censorship. So this movie is super strange. It has a bunch of sideshow workers, right? Sideshow performers who were there. So it has people that had real deformities and things. For instance, the conjoined sisters, Daisy and Violet Hilton, Schlitzie, Schlitzie was a man who was born without normal kind of human features, I guess, in the sense of, I don't even know how to describe it really. It's really difficult to describe the way that Schlitzie looks, but basically has microcephaly. So microcephaly is an extremely, extremely small brain and skull, and then a very small stature, but at the same time, almost a normal human size look at, like, proportion wise, the frame looks like an average human frame, but this poor person had very, very small skull, small brain, a lot of intellectual disabilities and things. And so it's kind of, so Schlitzie was actually female, and it's very scary. The thing, I guess, that's scary is that it has almost a look into what carnivals were really like in some ways. So it shows these people being used and their deformities being used for people to gawk at and make fun of and things. And in the beginning, you're just kind of like, oh, this is just a weird movie, whatever. And then it takes a very odd turn at the end where they turn the woman into a chicken lady. So it just scared me really bad as a kid. And I was like, oh my God, this is scary. This is like, oh goodness, I hated that. That movie scared the crap out of me so bad.
That's a hugely influential film.
Of course.
That influenced so many horror genre type of, just look, feel, sort of the weirdness of it. I think the weird, like, to me, you can almost draw a straight line to Eraserhead from Freaks, right? I mean, it's really disturbing.
Yeah, it's a nuts nuts movie, and it's so worth watching now because it really, like, again, you see it and you think, how weird is this really going to get? It gets so weird.
How weird can this film get? Yes, exactly.
It's so weird.
Now, so, did you just separate question? Did you watch and or enjoy the Hannibal series on television?
I watched some of Hannibal on television. I did not enjoy it very much because it turns. Okay, their relationship between each other is supposed to be a short one.
Okay. That's between Hannibal and the dude who's hunting him, who is the name escaping me.
Yeah, it's between it's between It's between Hannibal and William Graham. Yes. And so Will Graham in the books, he's been working with Hannibal Lecter for a small period of time and is tricked by Hannibal after he realizes that Hannibal is actually a serial killer and is in fact the serial killer that they're after. And so he then deforms Will and, hurts him badly, and it scars Will forever. And so in the TV show has a bunch of bad tropes, I think, including the autism as superpower thing, right? And the mental illness as superpower. And then it also brings up this thing where just because someone has a mental illness does not immediately make them violent or dangerous. And so as someone who has a lot of trauma from not a great
serial killers.
No, like from not a normal childhood, right? Yeah. That shows like that pissed me off because it's, that I don't know, there's no threat that doesn't make someone become the same thing with Dexter, right? Like, oh, the baby was messed up, whatever. It takes a lot more than a bad childhood to make a serial killer, to make someone violent, to make someone angry to that extent. So
yes,
it's super frustrating with shows like that. And they fell into so many tropes, and it could have been a very interesting thing, I think, or an interesting series. And then again, a lot of those shows, so I only watched the first like season and a half of Hannibal. And a lot of those shows too, in the hope, like let's say Dexter, in the hope of becoming a continual series, Dexter is like one of 1,000 serial killers in Miami at any given time. Like there's not even that many Taco Bells in Miami. It's crazy. There's no way that there's that many serial killers.
And the Taco Bells never get their own series.
Never. It's ridiculous. So yeah. So no, I did not particularly care for the Hannibal TV show. I think the definitive thing still is the books, and then the movies with Anthony Hopkins and with what is his name? The guy that plays Dollarhide. He's so good. Ralph Fiennes is so good. And Dollarhide is so much scarier than Hannibal Lecter. In my mind, Dollarhide is so much scarier, and it's based on a wonderful painting and a wonderful and weird person on his own right, William Blake.
Yeah.
So that would be my like number 1 and number 2, and then I guess my number 3 favorite horror movie of all time would probably be, I don't know, maybe The Exorcist. That's kind of a boring answer.
No, I don't think it's boring. I think that The Exorcist is up there still.
Yeah, it's still scary. The thing is, there's a lot of movies that don't. I'm trying to think of a movie that really scared me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's because there's kind of there's 2 measures of a good horror movie. For me, there's 3 almost. There's comic effect, like how bad is the horror movie? Like, is it over the top? Is it hilarious? Is it strange and weird and funny? And that would be movies like Freaks kind of goes over a bunch of different categories for me. It's like a historical document. It's also pretty creepy. But like that would be like a movie such as Silent Night, Bloody Night.
Yes.
That movie is hilarious. Yes. It is stupid as hell. It is not scary in the least, but it's supposed to be scary. And so it's very funny to me. And in some ways too, The Exorcist movies, especially the sequels, hit that same level where, okay, this was probably scary in the 80s. It is not scary anymore.
Nah. I mean, I think anytime you get into a sequel event, it's
never scary.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm hard pressed to think of a sequel that was scarier than the original. Period. For anything. I mean,
I think Silence of the Lambs. Technically, Silence of the Lambs is the sequel to Red Dragon.
Technically, but
and that book is scarier.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, but again, that's kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll give you Silence of the Lambs, but anything besides like any sequel out there that is using the name or the characters or anything from the first and is a true sequel. There isn't. I don't think.
Sure.
Maybe our listeners can point one out.
Maybe. I
don't think so.
I don't think so either, actually. The other one that I think is really good that doesn't get enough credit in some ways is the original Record, which was from was from I want to say it was from Brazil.
Yeah.
Maybe? Or Spain. It's from Spain. That movie was so scary. It was so good. Yeah.
The original Ringu was terrifying. I felt like that was the Americanized version is pretty good, pretty tight, pretty good, but still like there's something about the Japanese version of that is really more authentic and more just horrific. I think. And even though you're trying to catch up with the subtitles, you're trying to figure out what's going on, there's like a lot of cultural nuances that aren't very familiar to an American audience watching Ringu. But man, when she starts crawling out of that well, damn, you just are like, oh, this isn't okay. This is, you know what? I don't think this is good. This isn't going to end well. This is a bad idea.
There's some really good.
This is a bad idea.
There's some really legitimately good and scary Japanese horror movies. Man. Korean horror movies too. There's some really scary ones.
It is just like this messed up, like, I don't know, they were like the first ones to sort of kind of push the idea of something being deeply unsettling for a reasoning that you're not exactly sure why.
Sure.
Right? And you're like, hey, here's, we're going to flip all through these, it's a video that you die after watching or whatever, and it's like random, desettling, random. Oh, and here's a well. And you're like, huh. I wonder if that's going to be
interesting. Yeah.
And it just you just keep playing on it like that's a strange place to. She's crying from a television set. Sorry.
So what are your top three, Marie?
So my top three, I would have to say Hereditary pretty much just clocked it. That was a good one. I am a big fan of Blair Witch Project.
Okay, yeah, that was a good one.
I feel like the Blair Witch Project, again, was not just because it was the first one that did sort of the found video trope, but they had some really unsettling, some unsettling effects and some unsettling interactions with the actors, and this idea of it, you can go you should be able to see a 7-Eleven from anywhere in America kind of idea, right? Like there's nowhere that you should be able to get lost in America, and yet, you do, and you can't trust your own judgment, you can't trust your own senses. Things that you think should make sense, are no longer applied. There's not even the rational world anymore. I think that and how it ends, I thought that was a really good, scary film. I loved that. So I was thinking about my number three. I would have to say it's sort of like a toss-up. I think if I'm, for more long-term, I've been a big fan of 28 Days Later.
Yeah, that's one that always is on my list of like top 10.
Yeah.
But it's a good one. That's a really good one.
The first half of it, I think, is probably like, I think that it's a hard film to have a good ending to, or an ending that's going to be able to end. But just the opening scene of him coming out of the coma, not knowing what's going on.
Sure.
That they used, that somehow did get appropriated into, Walking Dead. I thought that was just so scary because it was the first idea that zombies, you're getting explicit ideas that zombies aren't these slow moving, that it could, flesh eating dead. It could be a virus. It could be something that we bring on ourselves, and they're going to be fast, right? Which to me is like, when you see them just running in a pack, you're like, oh, that's, again, that's scary. And that if you're infected, you are immediate. The effect is almost immediate. Just very like this high adrenaline, anxiety filled film. But when it ended, I was sort of like, I was let down. But I just didn't know how else, when you amp up something that well, I don't know how else you would end something like that. So that's one of my first openings.
Sure.
I think recently, Get Out, just for the simple fact that it made me as a white woman, I was so unsettled after it because I was like, wow, I have not thought about racism in this respect, in this light, for a very long time, in the guise of a horror movie too, which was also really scary. So I was like, that was really, really well done. And again, like, if you leave a movie and you feel like unsettled and creeped out and unsure, that's a horror movie.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a good thing. And like, it makes you, like, again, to me, like, a good horror movie is something that kind of pushes you with terror to make you think about things, or that may not feel comfortable anyways. And I think that those films did a really good job with that. I mean, I love all of terror, but I think that those to me are like the marked difference of.
No, yeah, those did really well. It's funny. I can actually hear in my head my mom screaming at me for not mentioning these other movies.
Oh, Dora, yeah.
I know. So my mom...
Does your mom like horror?
My mom loves horror movies. Oh. I gotta say, my mom's favorite horror director would probably have to be Dario Argento, who did... and actually, I was gonna mention another horror movie that I actually love that I didn't even think to mention at first is The Wicker Man. The original Wicker Man is so good. Awesome.
Oh, but the remake with Nicolas Cage.
The bees is so stupid. Oh my goodness.
Y'all need to stop what you're doing. Stop whatever important thing that you are doing. And I would even say put us on pause and go watch The Wicker Man with Nick Cage, and your life, the doors of perception shall swing wide.
It's a good one. So the movies that my mom would say every horror fan should watch, and I agree with her, is L'Uccello dal Piume di Cristallo or Piume di Cristallo. Sorry, my Italian is horrible. The Bird with the Crystal Plumage by, again, Dario Argento. A very good kind of more of a thriller than a horror movie, I would say. And then Deep Red or Profondo Rosso, which is really good. A really good movie. And a very scary one. Even if you are a little put off by, say, subtitles, it's so good. You have to watch it. So those would be, I think, another 3 that you gotta watch. They're so good. Oh my goodness. The Wicker Man.
Props to,
oh no, I was gonna say
mad props to Dora for being the horror fan.
Oh, I know, right? The Wicker Man, that image of just the, I don't know, pagan imagery always scares the crud out of me. And that image of the, the actual, the man itself made of wicker. Oh, so scary. Yeah. Burning in the, sort of the background.
It's like the figurines from Blair Witch.
Yes. Right? Yes. Yeah. Very similar. Yeah.
And you're sort of like, that shouldn't be. No. Right? Somebody made that. Like, that's representation of humans, and in a place that humans shouldn't be representing themselves, or that's, it's like, it's this weird kind of connection with nature of it is, I don't know, like that was what was so unsettling to me about Blair Witch too. You know, it's like, that's not good.
Ugh, so scary.
It's one of my favorites. And I will say, you know, again, shout out for like paranormal, what was Paranormal Experience?
Paranormal.
Oh, I can't remember it now. That was scary. That was good.
Paranormal Activity.
Paranormal Activity.
That's scary in a jump scare kind of way, though.
In a good jump scare.
No, it is. It's a good jump scare kind of way.
Nice jump scare. I think that's just a perfect jump scare movie in a lot of ways. Like,
it's pretty good.
I don't know, like Saw.
Saw stunk. Saw, those movies are so stupid.
Oh, you know which one I did like? So if you want to get self-referential with your horror, you got the whole Scream series, which are really good. But Cabin in the Woods, Joss Whedon.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Give it up.
Oh, I can't wait for Halloween, Marie.
Yeah, it's almost here, man. It's
I'm
just
so
right
excited. I told Katie I'm going to start decorating. She's like, it's not even August. I'm like, I don't care.
And then you got out the t-shirt.
We'll close the blinds. We'll make it dark in here.
You got out the giant orange
pumpkin
t-shirt.
My pumpkin shirt.
And you're like, it's on, baby.
She looks like a big nerd.
And she's like, oh God.
Oh God. All right. Let's move on to our next
listeners. Thing. Really quick, listeners, tweet us out and tell us what your favorite horror movies are and why. Maybe we will do a horror night. Like we watch live tweet with some of our favorites.
Honestly, I kind of think we should do like a Mystery Science 3000 sort of thing, where like me and you watch a horror movie live on Twitch or something and just make comments.
Oh my God!
The only thing is like we have to find a way to do it and not be
snarky.
No,
copyrighted.
So snarky, but copyrighty. Good. Yeah, copyrighty is the right word, I think. It's going to be rough. We have to. Well, the good news is a lot of those old movies didn't make any money in the first place, so no one cares if you play them on YouTube and Twitch. So that's great.
I think definitely. I'd be so in for that.
Oh, it'd be so awesome. We should get a couple other folks too. Maybe we can get the Not Alone. We can get Sam and Jason and Rob to join us.
Oh my God.
Pretty amazing.
Oh, I think we're gonna have to do that. That's a good idea.
All right. So the next thing we're talking about today, quick, is Reynolds number, Marie.
Burt Reynolds number?
Yes, Burt Reynolds number.
I don't have it. I don't think I wouldn't be calling him if I didn't. Okay. Good night, everybody. You've been great. That's
okay. So the Reynolds number is okay. So have you ever wondered?
No, but keep going. Yes.
Okay. Have you ever wondered to yourself, there's all these people engineering stuff. They test stuff at the lab scale and even at, say, the pilot scale. Mm-hmm. How do they know it'll work if they make it bigger?
Because Elon Musk tells them they have to.
So for instance, Elon Musk is going off the deep end. So for instance, this weekend, Marie, you were canning tomatoes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
Were you canning sauce or just tomatoes?
Just tomatoes.
Okay.
Just tomatoes.
Okay. Let's say you were canning sauce. Or let's say you were making sauce.
Okay.
In your kitchen, you got, say, like maybe a 10-gallon, and that's crazy big in the first place. Let's say you got like a 3-gallon pot, a giant pot to cook the tomato sauce in, right?
Okay.
And I have this recipe of I put my oven on this temperature or this heat.
Is this an authentic Italian recipe?
I'm just saying whatever.
I know, but it helps me.
Okay, yes, it's an authentic Italian recipe, Marie.
Thank you.
Straight from a Mama Dora. So I'm allowed to do that because that's how all of my uncles talk. So you put your oven at this amount of heat in. You stir it once every 5 minutes. You give a swirl around 10 times or something. You put in like the big thing of tomato. You put 5 onions, 20 cloves of garlic.
It's
a big ass pot. It's a big pot of sauce, right? Okay. You're making like 3-4 gallons of sauce.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Right?
Okay. All right.
Don't follow this recipe. It's going to come out terribly. Right? So you know, though, how much you put into stuff. You have all these other things, whatever. if you wanted to start making 20 gallons or 100 gallons or 10,000 gallons, how would you do that? Like, what do you think you would do?
I would guess that I would have to exponentially change the recipe somehow and make it bigger.
So like, okay, let's say you were doubling. Let's say you're going from like 3 gallons to 6 gallons. You think you would just double the amount of stuff you would put?
Well, hypothetically.
Okay.
But I think that there would be some problems with that.
Okay.
Just because liquid, like things measure out differently, right? I mean, it's not an apples to apples, quote unquote.
100%.
Like
100%.
Or onions to onions, right?
Right.
So you'd have to evaluate for each thing that you're doing.
Yeah. And so that is the challenge that chemists and chemical engineers, just engineers generally, faced when we were trying to start scaling things up to industrial production levels. Was I can get this thing to work in the lab, but if I just double the size or 100 times the size or whatever, it doesn't work. The reason why it doesn't work is because what you're trying to match are not the exact ratios of things or volumes or whatever. You're trying to match the thermodynamic state of the system at both the small scale and the lab scale. And so what engineers over time developed are known as dimensionless quantities. And what these are, they are ratios of fundamental forces or values. So for instance, the Reynolds number is a ratio of the inertial forces to the viscous forces within a fluid. So it's like
viscous.
So it's like it's like how much force is required for fluid to flow due to viscous dissipation. So like if it's really viscous, it'll take more force for it to flow, versus inertial forces, which is once it's moving, it'll move on its own.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what
I'm remembering a little of this thermodynamic lesson.
Sweet. Okay. So what Reynolds found was that you could define a number, which he called the Reynolds number, for any fluid in a pipe. And that number is equal to the density of the fluid times its velocity times the characteristic dimension of the pipe, which in pipes is usually the diameter of the pipe, divided by the dynamic viscosity of the fluid. And even if you had a pipe that's like a millimeter in diameter versus a 10-meter pipeline, so long as the Reynolds number is the same, you can expect the fluids to behave the same way.
Now, is it only fluids?
It's not just fluids. It's true. There's all kinds of dimensionless quantities. There's a whole bunch of them. So it generally it's used most often in the world of fluid mechanics and dynamics, but it's also used in other interesting ways. So for instance, one of the ones that you've probably heard of is the Mach number. Right? So like if something's going Mach 1, that's the dimensionless ratio of the speed of the object to the speed of sound of the fluid.
Yes.
Or the speed of sound in the fluid rather. So actually the Mach number,
it's also the car from Speed Racer.
It sure is, Marie. So the interesting thing with the Mach number.
You're welcome, science.
The interesting thing with the Mach number is it actually has really important ramifications for things like, say, the work that I do, where if a fluid approaches the Mach number, it means that you cannot get any more pressure loss in a pipe because it'll choke, the flow will choke, and you can't force more flow through a pipe than how much will leave at Mach number 1.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like that's a very simplified way of saying that answer.
Mm-hmm.
That has really big ramifications if you're trying to use pipes to relieve the pressure inside of an overpressuring vessel. Right? So if you have something that might explode and you're trying to get as much mass out of that thing as possible, the Mach number of that fluid is a really important parameter because that's going to determine how much mass you can possibly get out of any size pipe.
Okay.
So these things are really, really important. And it's just, I always think it's extremely fascinating that you could do this kind of stuff. So there's an idea called the Buckingham pi theory, which basically is the idea is that if you have some dimensionless, if you have some quantity that you think is a function of other things, right? So let's take, for example, our pasta sauce idea in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You think that the ultimate, say, tastiness, although that's an impossible thing to measure, but whatever, like the ultimate goodness of your pasta sauce is a function of the number of garlic cloves you put in, the number of onion things you chop, halves you chop, the amount of olive oil you put in, the amount of salt and pepper you put in, right? And the time you take to cook it. Well, you could, in theory, come up with a dimensionless quantity that has all of those values together. And then that would, in theory, if you defined your function in the beginning correctly, that will, in theory, describe the system for scale up. So long as that number was the same, you could go from, say, a 3-gallon pot to a 20-gallon to 1,000-gallon.
You would just have to use the same. Okay.
You would just have to make sure that your dimensionless quantity was the same. So it's a fascinating idea, and it literally, like, that is one of the defining characteristics of chemical engineering education versus other engineering disciplines, is that dimensionless quantity analysis, because other engineering fields do that, but they don't nearly use as many of them as chemical engineers do, because we worry a lot more about fluid flow.
So I'm assuming now that there's certain kind of algorithms and stuff that you can test them out hypothetically. But like if you got something like this wrong, you would probably, it could be relatively not just a disgusting tasting spaghetti sauce.
Right. Well, the beauty of the crazy thing is that all of these ideas were developed in like the 1880s and they all work. Like they still work. So in theory, yes, you could come up with a dimensionless quantity based on just, say, mathematical like simulation testing of computers and whatever to see what you'd get. But the ultimate creation of that unitless number would be up to you, the mathematician or the scientist or the engineer who develops it. And the thing is too, like, you can make dimensionless quantities that mean nothing, you know? So you could do like, you could make a dimensionless time that would be like, you know, the number of years, the time from, you know, whatever the time is now divided by the time since, well, I mean, a perfect example of that would be, say, like BC, right? Or AD. Like, that's a dimensionless time in theory because it's years. You could represent it as dimensionless if you did the number of years from, you know, whatever AD's start divided by the number of years from the beginning of time, right? Or you could do number of years today over the years since AD, or, you know, you could come up with all kinds of weird things, right? But you could call it its own thing, and then you could use it for mathematical descriptions. So, okay, this is all getting all tangled up now, Marie.
Just talking about pasta.
But the really interesting thing is that because of the way all of our mathematics works in describing physical systems, there are really cool mathematical ways that you can go from let's say you had a really, really, really complicated answer that was like, you know, it's this value at this temperature and this pressure and this mass or whatever. If you can define your math in terms of that dimensionless quantity, your answer becomes just one number. Like it's a Reynolds number of 12. Or it's a Reynolds number of 20,000. It's a Reynolds number of 50,000. And all of a sudden your extremely complicated equations become much more simplified. So it's just kind of a taste of this cool engineering thing that I think it's really fascinating. Listeners, I hope you found it fascinating. Marie's brain is melting.
No, I'm just trying to figure out how far you have to work to get to Burt Reynolds' number. That's all.
You got to work hard. It's the number of it's your mustache hairs over his mustache hairs.
Well, first of all, I don't have any mustache hairs.
That's what I'm saying. Yours is easy. Yours is easy to measure. Mine is difficult.
Oh, well, yeah.
I'm only at like a half a Burt at any given time.
Oh man. And half a Bert's just no Bert at all.
If you count my chest hair, I'm a full Bert and a half. All right, let's move on to the Alien Odyssey.
Everyone who's like, I don't know, anywhere in their 20s, there's probably like, except for you, for some strange reason, they're like, Bert who?
I know, seriously. Oh my goodness. All right, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode. It's been weird. We're going to do Alien Odyssey Part 3 now. I'm so excited.
Absolutely.
Let's do it, Marie. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.